Hello there again in Na'aleh land. We continue our series of honorable mention, focusing on the mitzvah of loving your neighbor the way you love yourself. Today's class, Le'iling Nishmas Rachel Leah Basar Chaim Tzvi Aleh Shalom. Thank you out there, all the Na'aleh people who work so hard in bringing Torah to the masses wherever they may be. Okay, we left off last time. We were delineating, based on the book of Rabbi Zelig Pliskin, Love Your Neighbor, the different components that are involved in the mitzvah of loving your neighbor. We've been looking at this mitzvah, the most famous verse in the entire Torah, from different aspects. Halachic, we're going to get to even philosophical, and we continue now just certain components that make up this mitzvah. We continue. The commandment will oblige you to feel happiness for the good fortunes of others according to the Pele Yoetz. Here someone has struck it rich, someone just did a nice shidduch, and you feel good for them, then you fulfill the mitzvah of loving your neighbor the way you love yourself. Furthermore, as we stressed last time, this is a mitzvah that can be done in thought, and it's possible to rack up in the course of just one day thousands of this mitzvah, just by feeling good for someone else when they have good news, or chalila, sharing their misfortune, feeling bad for them when they have bad news. We who live in Israel, wherever Jews are, and there's terrorist attacks, there's plenty of occasions to feel the misfortune of someone else, and that feeling of sensitivity for your fellow Jew, that is clearly fulfillment of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Now, a story about Rabbi Avram Grudzinski, when he was actually a very young man, he was extremely happy. And he asked the reason why he was so happy, and he explained that there's a student from the Slobodka Yeshiva where he learned that was being wed far away. And he couldn't go to the wedding, but he said, I am so happy for the person being wed tonight. They saw on his face the joy, and his fellow was being wed so far away, and he could not attend, but it was apparent on his face the way he felt for this person. Another story about the Satmar Rav Zechon Rabbi Eilish. A person came to him and said his wife was not well, his children were not well, he has enormous medical expenses, who knows what's going to be, he's not well. And the Satmar Rebbe gave him a very, very large sum. No sooner had this person left, and someone then came to inform the Satmar Rebbe, he didn't tell you the truth. His wife is well, his kids are fine, he misled you. Said the Satmar Rebbe, I'm so relieved that everyone is well. He was so happy for them. He wasn't bitter that he had been misled, he was relieved that in fact they were well and that they're misled. And here's a story which is only I was privileged to know Rav Chaim Shmulevitz a little bit. He was my Messiah Kedushin. But only a person of the tremendous sensitivity of Rav Chaim Shmulevitz could... This is a tremendous story. Said Rav Chaim that when he sees a young child wear his first pair of shoes, he is moved to tears because he thinks about how the joy the mother must have as a child is putting on the first pair of shoes. We're going to contrast this story, if not today, then a different time, with the story of Rav Gustman describing what happened with his son's shoes. But bear this, how Rav Chaim Shmulevitz was overjoyed. He would just be moved to tears when he saw a baby in their first pair of shoes, knowing how much joy this would bring to the parents. The commandment to love your neighbor obliges us to warn other people about possible loss or damage. Besides from the fact there's also a commandment, a violation, you cannot put a stumbling block in front of someone who's blind. This does not just apply to someone who is a cruel person who gets their kicks out of tripping blind people, but if you give someone bad advice. And we're going to get to the subject of advice probably still today, but because that's a component of loving your fellow person. Offering them advice when you're competent and avoiding giving them advice when you're incompetent. But the take-home message from over here is that if you see someone who could be possibly making an error or could get themselves into damage or loss, you're obliged, says Yisod V'Shor Shavoda, to inform them that's a fulfillment of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. If you see someone's garment lying on the floor and you pick it up, that's V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. It's very common around the hat rack or coat rack, there's things that fell down. So a person who has been trained in the mitzvah, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you see something on the floor, you just pick it up and hang it up. You don't leave it on the floor for people to step on it and they get kicked around. If you don't do that, that reveals a lack of sensitivity towards V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. We are obliged, and the Chofetz Chaim writes about this in his letters, to give people helpful advice whenever that's possible. And we are also obliged, part of the commandment, is to cheer someone up when you see that they are sad, you see that they're lonely. So not just to think in your heart, as we said already, you can fulfill the mitzvah by thought, But it would be much more important in this case, if you see someone who's sad, if you can raise their spirits, elevate their cheer, then you'd be obliged to do so. Again, it's not something which is just commendable, but an obligation. Likewise, if you have relatives that live far away, now the Chafetz Chaim writes this, pardon me, this is the Pele Yoetz, or this is the Pele Yoetz. The Pele Yoetz writes that if you have relatives who live far away, and there is a danger where you live, it's a chesed, it's a kindness, it's v'avar chamocha, to write them a letter telling them that you're safe, you're fine. It's nowadays that would be a phone call, nowadays that would be an email, but if you know people are apprehensive and they're nervous, then right away really don't make them look for you, send them a message saying that everything is fine, and you fulfill a mitzvah. Likewise, very important to stress this to yeshiva bachrim, avrechim, anybody in a shul, in a beis medrash, in a yeshiva, this commandment